Good morning, church. Happy Mother's Day. You're welcome. So I was going around this morning asking guys what the plan was for the day. And I got to say, I was just kind of in the middle of the road on this. Guys, we're going to have to really work on our plan. I got a couple I thought were really good. Going to go see Grandma today. Thought that was pretty awesome. That's super cool. I got one. We're going to surprise Grandma, so that's good. Hopefully, Grandma's there, and so that's going to be good. And then I got one that was, yeah, we're just going to hang out. I was like, so you put your collective male brain power together on this day and came up with, yeah, we're going to do nothing. That's the plan for the day. So guys, how many of you, your plan for the day is to do nothing? That's your plan for the day. Oh my word. How many wives are good with that? Not the guy who said that was his plan for the day. His wife did not raise her hand. I was really hoping for pointers. At least, guys, you got to do the dishes, right? Like, putting dishes in the dishwasher, does that qualify as doing dishes? Yes. No, does not qualify as doing. And when we were kids, my mom was more of a germaphobe than I am, and she made us boil water on the stove. When you did the dishes, you put it on the rack, and then you had to rinse the dishes with boiled water from the stove. Anybody ever do anything like that? All right, so that was my mom's deal. And so doing dishes in our house was this huge deal, and there were 9 people living there, and so it was this large event. I do remember the year that there was a general female revolt in the house, and I remember that year as a bad year. I'd spent most of my life just going, showing up, and food was there, and from that day forward, I had to commit to be involved in that, so I don't know. All right, how many guys feel like you've got a pretty good plan for Mother's Day? You think you're going to hit a home run? How many think you got it planned out? How many had no clue that it was Mother's Day and you got here and you're like, oh my word? Okay. Yeah. Nice. So grab your Bibles, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. We are in a series in Judges, but we're going to take a break for Mother's Day. Samuel is actually the last judge, but we're not there in our series. We're at Samson, but we're going to take kind of a little break today, and I'm going to hopefully challenge moms on Mother's Day, hopefully encourage you and challenge you on Mother's Day. And so I'm always, as a communicator, I'm always a little bit unnerved on a day like Mother's Day, because the audience themselves, as different than most other days of the year, the audience comes into the event with varying degrees of emotion when they walk in the door. And so if you had a great mom, then Mother's Day represents really a day of lightness and honor and enjoyment for you. And if your mom's brokenness showed up regularly in her parenting, then Mother's Day is a little confusing for you. If your mom has passed away, then you kind of have a tendency, if you had a great relationship with her, you have a tendency to be a little bit down on the day just because you miss her, and your mind goes back and replays some special events, and you just have a tendency to be down. If If you're a new mom and you're considering all of this stuff, or you're parenting your children and you're going through that, then Mother's Day it represents a completely different emotion. If you're a mom who lost a child, then Mother's Day is an anniversary of that memory, and you experience the joy of everyone else with heaviness and pain. And so I want to speak into that, and I want to just say that I recognize that in our audience we have this vast emotional process that we're going through. And so hopefully for this next 3 or 4 hours that I'm going to speak on this passage, that I can be a source of blessing and encouragement to you no matter where you are in this stage of your story. So my upbringing, my parenting is really a unique parenting experience. How many of you, your parents reared you in church, and church was a massive, regular part of your story? How many had that experience? Okay, so around half, maybe a little more half of our audience. That's true of my story. I grew up in church. In fact, my father was Catholic, non-practicing Catholic by rearing, and when he was 21, 22 years old, came to faith in Christ. He actually began dating my mother, and through the course of their relationship, before they really got serious, he got saved and was discipled, and then they developed a Christian home from that point forward. My mom grew up in a decidedly Christian home. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was killed in a train accident when she was maybe 2 years old. There were 9 children, and then she has a younger brother, and this is before the days of the social safety net and welfare, and my grandmother had to care for 9 children after the loss of her husband. But they grew up in a decidedly Christian home. So my decidedly Christian home, I went to church constantly, and really good pastors and Bible teachers and just effective, godly men. It was part of my story. And then we also went to a Christian school, and that was part of my story as well. And so I had that. But my story also includes this major disconnect between Sunday and Sunday's image and after church life. And my mom never in her life was able to conquer anger. She just never solved it. And her most rambunctious child was the general object of her life's displeasure. And that was me. And so I grew up in an experience which was really very complex and very unique. There was a lot of physical violence in my home growing up. Really bizarre physical violence and threats and strange behavior and just bizarre kind of things. And so I grew up in a home where there was Sunday, and then there was the rest of life. You know what I'm talking about? Like after church on Sunday, it was, get home, change your clothes. If you don't get home and change your clothes, they're going to kill you. And there was a lot of beatings and pretty violent beatings and, that kind of stuff. And so actually, the minister that I am today is in a real way impacted by that. I don't know if you can pick this up, but in my preaching, I constantly am calling you to be real and to live it out, and to for it to be the same on Monday as it is on Sunday. And that comes out of my growing experience, where what you saw on Sunday, and if you saw us on Sunday, I was like the cutest kid in the whole world on Sunday, because my mother was obsessed with image. And as the little boy, I went to church in a 3-piece suit. And I was all boy, and so I didn't take care of my hair. You know what I mean? And so they shaved my head. And I remember when I was in the 7th grade, I asked my dad, can I have hair? And he said, do you feel like you can take care of it? And I said, yeah, I think so. And they gave me permission to have hair. And so I was like this brush cut little kid and really blonde hair and little stubble and in a suit and a tie sitting in church without air conditioning, sweating to death. But image looked fantastic. I mean, we looked like the super together, church family. 2 rows, 9 of us, big, and then the rest of life. When I tell stories like, the screaming and then the telephone rings and the screaming stops, that was my story. Well, I know that because the beatings would stop. I loved when the phone rang. And so that's kind of my journey. And so I walk into Mother's Day super thankful for my wife, who was the first woman in my life who managed life vastly differently. And I remain just always perplexed and blessed by her ability to love, because my story doesn't start until college, halfway through college, where I, started developing that relationship. And so I get that in this audience, there are some that had this amazing mom, and I have no connection to that. Like, I have no way of saying, I know what that's like, or, I'm with you. I don't have anything. But I also know that in this audience, there are as many as had this amazing mom also have a story that is like or kind of like, mine. And so I want to kind of speak into that. And I want you to see from our passage this morning this amazing story, this journey that this woman goes on. So one of the things that's super compelling to me as a human, as living life, is that really all we're doing is writing a story. That's all we're really doing with our lives, is we're writing a story. So the story of today is, I went to church, and the story of today is I sat next to so-and-so, and the story of the day is we did this for lunch, and the story of the day is I did this, or the story of the day is I was mad at so-and-so, and the story of the, so we're just writing a story, and then the compilation of our story becomes a novel, becomes the story of our life, and becomes the heritage that we establish going on to the next generation. Like your kids 20, 30 years from now could stand on a stage, some of them probably pass out, but could stand on a stage and tell a story on Mother's Day and say, hey, let me tell you about my growing up experience. My mother wasn't perfect, but she was a passionate Christ follower. My mother was this, or my mother was that, or I never knew my mother, or my mother disowned me, or I made it to adulthood and then it was just constant conflict, or they can tell a story. And so I want to kind of just walk through this passage of Scripture, and I want it to be real, and I want it to carry the weight of what it is. And it's a really amazing story, and we can kind of read through it really fast and not emote in what's really going on. But I want us to stop, and I want us to feel what's happening. So 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, I don't know how to say that, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. So we got a guy, husband Elkanah, of the son of Jeroham, of the son of Elihu, of the son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, And the name of the other is Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And so this is a really complex situation. Like, how many of you like the idea, whether it happens or not, but how many of you like the idea of being loved by another person? How many just like that idea? Okay, how many don't like that idea? I mean, it's just so, we're created to be in relationship with others. And so here is this guy, Elkanah, and he's married to Peninnah and Hannah. And so these two women now share life with one man. Peninnah has kids, which in this time meant that God liked you. It meant that God favored you. And not having children meant that God did not favor you. It just meant culturally that God was displeased with your life. So here's this woman who has a husband who chose to marry someone else, who is also living with the cultural understanding. And she's emoting this idea that God doesn't like me. Now, I don't know if you've ever processed that. And it's one of the beauties of grace. One of the beauties of grace is that God extends favor to us in spite of who we are. And that's the beauty of the gospel, that Jesus died for our sin. So what makes us separated from God, or makes God displeased with us, is imputed or applied to Christ. And his righteousness, the part of Christ that God said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased," is imputed to us, and we have standing before God, so that as we stand before God, God is pleased with us. So this woman has this cultural understanding, and it's not just hers, it's everyone else. Like, everyone that looks at her, she experiences the judgment of others' eyes. Ladies, have you ever been in an environment where you just felt when other people look at you, they are not pleased with you? They are judging you as not equal to them. Not good. So here Hannah has a husband who married another woman, so she's sharing life with someone else. She has no children, so she has the own personal feeling of, I don't measure up, I'm not good enough. And then she has this sense that God is not pleased with her, and she would also experience the displeasure of the people in community. Verse 3, now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. And so every year he made this show of spirituality. He carried out the tradition. He's clearly not a godly man. He married two women. He's violating the commands of God. But he's going to church, not the right word, but he's going to show everyone that he is something. Verse 4, and on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And so this guy, the husband, shows favoritism to Hannah publicly in front of his other wife and in front of their kids, shows these others that he doesn't like them as much as he likes Hannah. Now, how many of you guys, I've asked you this question before, how many of you know for sure you weren't the favorite in your house? Okay. How many of you liked it? Right? We don't like to know that we are not the favorite. Now, I wasn't the favorite I told you that. I tortured my brother. How many tortured their siblings? Okay. How many of you don't know it, but your siblings probably know that they tortured? No, so I was mean to him because he was the favorite. That's what happens here. Verse 6, her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. And so the most tender thing, the part that caused her the greatest amount of angst and agony and hurt, Peninnah would pick it. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore, Hannah wept. She cried. She wouldn't eat. She's depressed. She's broken. She has a husband who has a show of spirituality, but it's not enough to form his character. Hey, before I go on, let me just say this. A crazy home environment, like Samuel's eventually going to come out of this, but a crazy home environment is not a guaranteer that the children are going to turn out crazy too. There's been plenty of godly people that have grown up where mom and dad, there was a loveless home, where there was not the right form of godliness, where it was complex and strange, where the people who are supposed to love the children didn't. There are plenty of children that have grown up in that environment that turned out well. And mom, just because you have a husband who doesn't love Christ well, or doesn't live it out, or just because he doesn't necessarily model himself as a Christ follower in his behavior, don't lose heart. Don't become discouraged. This is Hannah's story, and one of the greatest prophets in Israel history is going to come out of that. So Hannah is weeping. She won't eat. Verse 8. I love this. Guys, when your wife is crying, what do you want to do? Fix it. It's not really true. You want to make it stop. You said that. That's right. It was a lady that said that, by the way. Like when her face is leaking, you got to make that stop. It's like Hoover Dam has a crack. The world is going to end. There's going to be lots of damage downstream. There's something coming out of your face. I don't know what it is, but it has to stop. So she's unable to eat. Everybody's having a party. Everybody's having a great time. In fact, everybody's about to get drunk. They're having a great time. And Hannah can't eat, can't connect to the party, and she's crying. And look at what he says. Why what's up? What's wrong with you? Why do you weep? Like, this is the guy who married another woman who publicly shows preferential treatment to her to make her life as complex as it possibly can be. And then he follows that up with, what are you so upset about? Why aren't you eating? Why is your heart sad? Dumbest comment in all of Scripture right here. Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Ain't I enough? I make you happy? Like, how is this about him? Right? Like, guys, when we're like totally stupid, we can always point to Elkanah and say, at least I don't try to tell my wife, hey, baby, I'm enough for you. Don't you think I'm enough? Like the other wife your mistress doesn't like me. Hey, baby, I'm here. I'll give you extra food tonight at dinner. Let's go get drunk. You know, what in the world is this guy doing? So he makes this about himself. I got to fix it. I can't, you're not, obviously not pregnant. I can't fix that. And so he says to her this obnoxious comment, am I not more to you than the clear favor and blessing of God? And Scripture doesn't need to answer when a moron asks a question, and he just drops it. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, okay, so they're having a party. Having a party. And they all get blasted. And so, I'll ask Robert, because you know, what happens after you get blasted? Sorry about that, buddy. And so they all go to sleep. They're all wasted. So they all go to sleep. And after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, she gets up in the middle of the night. She's just broken. Now, Eli, the priest, was sitting in the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She's like crying out, not crying out loud, but crying herself to emptiness. She is just broken. And she vowed a vow and said, God, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a son, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will touch his head. That's a reference to the Nazirite vow, that he would be separate and holy to God. She's saying, God, if you give me a child, I will raise him to be yours, to serve you. Eli's standing there, and as she continued to pray before the Lord, Eli observed her. This is verse 12, verse 13. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her as to be a drunken woman. Everybody else is getting wasted. She's here now in the presence of God, praying, as it were, but she's in fact, like her mouth's moving, but she's praying from her heart. And Eli said to her, how long will you go about being drunk? Put your wine away from you. Cut this out. This isn't right. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord. I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. For all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. She's like, I'm not drunk. I'm not that. I don't do that. I'm just broken. Now, I have this interesting little thought here. Eli suddenly goes from anger, from seeing this woman he thinks drunk, to now he has a woman in front of him who's crying. What, again, is a man's natural response when he stands in front of a woman crying? Stop. This is what he says. Go in peace, the God of Israel grant your petition that you may have it. Hey, go, you're good, get out of here, God will give it to you. Now, I don't know if I'm reading into that. But he basically says to her, God will give you what you've asked for. Now, what has happened? What in Hannah's life has changed? Does she have a husband who is wholly committed and dedicated to her alone? No. Does she have a baby? Is she pregnant? What has changed from the time that she walked into the temple, or into the place of worship, not the temple, but into the place of worship? What has changed from that moment until now? She has a promise from God. That's what she has. That's what she has. God said through Eli, you're going to have a baby. "18. And she said, let your servant find favor, grace in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad." Her complete look on life changed when she recognized the promise of God in her current conflict. That is, when she realized that God was going to do what he said he would do, that God would keep his promise. She believed God would keep his promise when she possessed the promise of God. You're going to have a baby. That she got that promise through Eli from God. She said, I'm okay. Not because her husband was perfect, not because her family was corrected, not because everything suddenly became different or right or ordered or organized, but because God said, it's okay. And moms, sometimes life is insane. Sometimes your husband is wonderful and fantastic, and then he wakes up. I don't know. Sometimes, he gets it, and maybe for a season in your life, he's got it, and things are just smooth, and that's great, and bless you, and enjoy that. You have just a taste of this tiny little glimpse and taste of heaven. It's wonderful. But maybe he doesn't love you well. Maybe he has other things that you feel like are in competition with his affection. And you live with the constant reality that there are other things that he seems to love equally as you. Sure, he shows you favor, but the other is always there. Maybe when you are broken, he is boorish when trying to deal with your brokenness. Maybe his answer is, hey, baby, I'm here. And he's got no emotional connection to your heart whatsoever. Maybe home is super complex for you. In fact, it gets to the place where when no one's looking or when no one else is around, your heart breaks for the spiritual formation of your children or your grandchildren, for the spiritual environment of your home, for your own faith journey, for just the brokenness of life. And you sit down, and the answer is not a fixed husband. And the answer is not fixed children. The answer is in the gentle promises of God. It is in the quiet moments that we get up, that we hear the quiet promises of God. I will never leave. I will never leave. I am the Lord. I do not change. I will never leave. I will not abandon. I will not forsake you. Maybe we hear the promises of God. I created you. I love you. My mercies for you are fresh every day. And it is the promise, not the kids, not the husband, not the finances, not the health, it is the simple promise of the infinite Creator that sustains us when we walk through. 18, 19. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to the house of Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son and called his name God Hears Me. For she said, I asked for him from the Lord. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice to pay his vow. But Hannah didn't go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, okay, do what seems best to you. Wait until you've weaned him, only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with him, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli, and she said, O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And she worshiped the Lord there. In 2 Samuel 2, verse 21, the Bible goes on to say that Hannah ultimately ends up with 5 other children. She has 3 more sons and 2 daughters. So God blessed her immensely after the period of this great trial. Let me tell you a story about a friend of mine. She's passed away now. She's in heaven. But I knew her in my first church. Took my first church when I was 25. I was really young, and I tend to be a little scatterbrained. Anybody a little scatterbrained? Okay. Anybody married to somebody that doesn't know that they're scattered-brained? And so I need to have somebody around me that makes sure that the details of my life are organized. And she did this for me as I was pastoring the church. She had her own job, and I would just send her email projects, and she would take care of it. If I needed something, she would order it. If something was happening, so she did all of that work for me. Her name was Brenda. Her husband was Dave. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and Brenda and her 3 children came to church all the time. Her husband had nothing to do with church at all. And so I'm young and brash and super confident, and so I decide I'm going to go visit this guy, and I'm going to witness to him, and we'll see what happens. So I go to his house in a little town called Seymour, Indiana. I go to his house. He owns, he's a hardworking guy. He has a factory job that he works during the day, and then he has about 6 or 8 head of cattle that he takes care of, and he's got about 100 acres of land, and he manages that. So he works all the time, and he likes beer way too much. And usually the end of the day was about 6 beers, and I didn't know that in advance of me getting there. So I get there to his house. He has slammed his beer, and now we're into our discussion. And I start witnessing to him, and he is super gracious to me, in that he leaves us outside on their picnic table. Now, we are in the country in southern Indiana where the bloodsuckers multiply at a rate unforeseen anywhere on the face of the earth. And the mosquitoes are insane. Now, I generally am mosquito resistant, or usually mosquitoes are like, no, and they go somewhere else. And so I'm pretty good, but this guy was amazing. He sat there and nothing, and I beat off hundreds of mosquitoes. I was a mess. I was in shorts. It was terrible. I was telling him about Jesus, and I was thinking I am going to be sucked dry before this was over. And he knew it. And he told me later he did it on purpose. And so he's telling me his theology. God is essentially a modified pantheist. God is in this rabbit, he says. He points to the rabbit over here. And God is in this tree over here. And God is all around him, all around us. And I present to him the fallacy of his argument to his slightly inebriated mind. And I presented the fallacy of his argument. At the end of the day, he remained unpersuaded, and I went back blissfully to the car and said, wow, usually I get a little better response, but this did not work. A couple of years later, on a Wednesday evening, his wife comes to me in tears. She's not a cryy woman, watch Old Yeller cry at the end, even though you've seen it 50 times. She's not a crying woman, and she's in tears. So we sit down, and I can picture exactly where we were in the auditorium. And she says, my husband has decided that our sons are just wasting time at church. And he has told me that they're not allowed to go to church anymore. Can I leave him? One of those light, easy questions that people ask their minister shortly after a service. And so I processed the question with her, and he did. He was a hard-working man. His oldest son had a bend towards laziness. Anybody have a kid bend towards laziness? Had a bend towards laziness, and when I say a bend, he was all in. And it irritated his dad. His dad was a hard-working man. It really irritated his dad. And so he decided that his son wasn't going to be able to go to church anymore, and his two oldest sons weren't going to go. And she says, I want to leave. We processed this question, and I told her that biblically, you can't. That this doesn't qualify as a reason for divorce. About 6 months later, I get an email from her, and she says, I don't know what's going on, but my husband said he's coming to church. We had started 2 services, and we had an early service on Sunday morning, which was early enough in the morning that we could have church, and he could get out and get home and get to the work for the rest of the day. And so what he had decided was he was sick of arguing with his wife about this stupid religion that she believed, that he was going to go to church and listen and show her how ignorant she was. Always a good strategy, men. And going to show her how stupid she was and prove to her logically how dumb her faith is. So he shows up. It's November-ish time. She sends me a note, and she says, I have no idea he's coming back. And he came back and back. Then she says, I don't even know what to say, a little email back and forth. She says, he wants a Bible. Now, we think that's spiritual. He wanted a Bible because he needed the book to show her how stupid she was. He was going to read it to show her how dumb she is. So we monogrammed a Bible for him, made it all fancy, and gave him a Bible. Then he started showing up on strange times. He started showing up because we did church all the time. Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. You know, that kind of church. And so we had lots of church. And so he started showing up on strange times. And he showed up on a Wednesday night in April, May. So, whatever. I preached, and at that time, every single service, I did come forward invitations. If you're new to church, it may be a little weird to you, but we used to have these events at the end of the service where if you wanted to pray or pray with someone or talk to someone, then you could come forward and we would take you into a room and talk to you. And so we had a come forward invitation, and I had them all the time. Sunday morning, not Sunday school, but Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, always had come forward invitation. So it was my normal thing, Wednesday night, come forward invitation, and David Reeser walks out, center aisle, and walks down the aisle. The whole church, head bowed, eyes closed. Yeah, right. The whole church went, oh. Came forward, gave him to a worker, went to the back room. He didn't come forward for any other reason, but he had questions. And he went to that back room, was gone for a long time. His wife and I were in the back corner of the church, crying and praying. He comes out, he comes up to meet me, and I said, David, why did you come forward tonight? What decision did you make? And he said, I trusted Christ as my Savior. Like 5 weeks later, he's teaching 5th grade boys Sunday school class. I mean, his wife had been discipled for years, and we got him. He was an elder in the church when I left, and his wife died in her sleep. He's married again. He's just passionately following Christ. The cool part of this story is the story that Brenda tells. He did not love her well. I remember she sent me a note. Pastor, I do not know what to do with the beer because the fridge was full of beer, but he never touched another one. She's like, it's been in there forever, and I don't know what to do with it. And I said, give it to Robert. And no, I did not. I didn't know Robert at the time. I said, pour it out. And, sorry, man. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I'll pick somebody else next time. Her legacy, 16 years. 16 years. We prayed for this man. We had a Bible study, and at this Bible study, we were doing evangelism training. We asked people to pick someone that they knew to share the gospel with, and a guy picked David, and I said, man, pick somebody else. It's just a dead end. He was so hard for 16 years. Now, she's in heaven. She's gone. Her story is like this window of her marriage is not perfect. And it was really strange. And he was not the greatest husband by any stretch of the imagination. He'll tell you that now. And he was not particularly gracious. And he had other things that he loved far more than his wife. And he didn't help raise his children. He wasn't there. And all of that stuff. This story is super complex. But the legacy that she tells is one of faithful walk with Christ in the midst of brokenness. I don't know your story. I don't know your husband. And I'm in church so long that you are beautiful people. And it's amazing, but I don't know what you're like when you go home. Like you could be better, or you could be, I was going to pick on Robert, but I don't know what to say. You could be crazy. You could just not have figured out how to handle your anger. It just shows up at home. I don't know. I got lost. This is my last thing. Mom, don't be discouraged in the journey. Don't be discouraged in your journey. If your husband doesn't love you like he should, don't be discouraged. If it's not working out like it, don't be discouraged in the journey. Hannah has this crazy story. She's also the mother of one of the greatest spiritual leaders in the nation's history. Don't be discouraged in the journey. Number 2, trust God even when the results are not evident. That is, Hannah gets to the place where God says, I'll take care of that, and she is not even pregnant, but she's fine. Because she trusted God before the results were even evident. 3, create a heritage of faith for your children. I don't know if your husband is the spiritual leader of your home. I don't know where he's at, but that is no excuse for you not to establish a faith heritage for your children. Create a faith heritage to your children. And I know, and I do not say that lightly, I know how incredibly difficult it is to pursue Christ when your partner does not. I think the most difficult thing to do is to get up, go to church on Sunday when your spouse sleeps in or goes and does whatever. It's incredibly difficult. But create a heritage, create a story, create a heritage of faith for your children, because you have no idea what your faithfulness will produce. You have no idea. You have no idea. Today, Brenda's 3 children are faithful Christ followers. They're spread out over the country. One's in Dallas, one's in Georgia, one's back at their home in Indiana. And they all have children, and they're rearing the next generation. It wasn't because David did not figure it out until his sons were both gone. It was because Brenda, for years, faithfully walked with Christ. Mom, don't be discouraged in the journey. Just pray, trust God. Okay. When we get together next week, we're going to pick up Samson again. I didn't want to do Samson and Delilah on Mother's Day. I thought, I'm smart enough to know that one. We'll pick up Samson when we get together next week. Moms, you are so precious to us. We love you. You please us. You are a joy to us. We delight in you. We are incapable of good, effective speech. We love you far more than we can articulate. We see the incredible stuff you do, and we are so happy that you do it. Thank you for being the women that you are. Thank you for being real. Thank you for sharing life with us. We honor you. We love you. God, thank you.